Goedenavond, hartelijk welkom bij Blauw, Bloed extra met vanavond het vervolg van de unieke documentaire serie die de BBC maakte over de jubilerende koningin Elizabeth. Als je kijkt naar 60 jaar Elizabeth, dan kan je niet om Diana heen. Haar verloving en huwelijk met prins Charles, een echtscheiding en uiteindelijk haar tragische dood in 1997. Vanavond zien we hoe Elizabeth hier als koningin en ook als grootmoeder op reageerde. Maar we beginnen met hoe het voor Elizabeth als koningin allemaal begon op 6 februari 1952. De dood van haar vader, koning George VI. Kijkt u naar het derde en laatste deel alweer van The Diamond Queen.
This is London. It is with the greatest sorrow that we make the following announcement. It was announced from Sandringham at 10:45 today that the King, who retired to rest last night in his usual health, passed peacefully away in his sleep earlier this morning.
60 years ago, February the 6th, 1952, the Queen's father, King George VI, died here at Sandringham. Previous day, he'd been out shooting rabbits, a favourite occupation, and he went to bed with his usual cup of cocoa. He wasn't a well man. He'd survived some very serious operations, but he was all of 56 years old, and his death came as a terrible shock. When this defining moment, the start of the Queen's reign, happened, she knew nothing. She was thousands of miles away in Kenya on the first leg of a Commonwealth tour. Prince Philip was told first. When he heard, said an aide, he looked as if the whole world had dropped on him. He broke the news to his wife. Delayed by thunderstorms, it took her 24 hours to get back to British soil. She was seen sitting alone, tearful and white-faced, staring out of the aircraft window. But by the time she landed, she was poised, already ready. Met by Winston Churchill and Britain's political grandees, this 25-year-old mother of 2 young children began a life sentence, even if it was a gilded cage and a fate she accepted.
I think one of the most interesting things is, as I'm sort of approaching the age that she was when she became queen, that you think about, you know, she was 25 when she became queen. Yes. And you think about how young that is for somebody to take on this incredible responsibility and give up her life in service.
She took the helm from the man who had saved the monarchy after the abdication crisis. And on the day of King George VI's funeral, the Queen, with her grandmother and mother, looked shell-shocked. A vast weight of expectation now sat on her shoulders. It took 16 months to plan, but on Tuesday, June the 2nd, 1953, the Queen was crowned at Westminster Abbey.
Through the grey dawn of that day came people from all over the world, making for the route of the royal procession.
People poured into London, a shabby post-war capital now decorated at last. The coronation was the most important moment in the Queen's life, certainly the most important official moment. As a 27-year-old, she'd thought long and hard about what was ahead, and she practiced in the Buckingham Palace ballroom using sheets pinned together as her 21-foot-long train. She also walked around wearing the crown on her head so that her neck could get used to its very considerable weight. As the Queen left for Westminster in the Gold State coach, there were 2 small figures watching from one of the windows at the front of Buckingham Palace. One was young Prince Charles, dressed in a silk suit, and the other was Princess Anne. and one of them would soon leave to become the first British child ever to see his mother crowned monarch. Princess Anne wasn't quite 3, and she was told she was too young.
The only thing that I remember, if that's the right expression, is feeling just a touch grumpy that I wasn't allowed to go. And after that, nothing. So I should have been aware of being on the balcony, but you see, I'm not entirely sure whether I was aware of that or whether it's just the fact that you see photographs and you think, I must have remembered it. Yeah. I'm not sure that I do.
A novel aspect of the coronation was that it was televised. Both Churchill and Buckingham Palace courtiers had been against letting such a vulgar new medium inside the Abbey, but the Queen herself wanted the cameras in. And back then, BBC presenters could almost have been mistaken for somebody else.
We take you first to Buckingham Palace. There we shall see the departure of the Queen's procession to the Abbey.
So she goes on her way towards Westminster.
More than half the adult population of Britain, 20 million people, managed to watch it.
I was 10 at the time, and I remember my family scraping together their savings and buying a small black and white television to watch it. But it was hugely exciting. Everybody was really uplifted. For most of the adults present, it was the first great event since the dreary days of the war and the tough days that immediately followed. It was symbolic of a new life, people thought.
And the Queen looked terrific. She was beautiful, and she had this dashing consort. And it was one of those moments in a country where we tend to be a little bit ill at ease with ourselves, a bit nitpicky, that it was gilded, and it was going to get better.
O God, the crown of the faithful, bless, we beseech thee, this crown, and so sanctify thy servant Elizabeth, upon whose head this day thou dost place it for a sign of royal majesty.
The things which I have here before promised, I will perform and keep, so help me God.
As a historian put it at the time, no monarch was ever crowned more fully in the presence of the people. And yet, there was one moment in the ceremony where the cameras were kept away, which was veiled and never seen then or since. And it happened here, when the Queen was anointed with the holy oil, because for the Queen, being called by God was not a metaphor. It was absolutely serious. What do you think that meant to her in a direct spiritual way?
I think it meant a profound sense of vocation about all this. Not simply stepping into a role, but actually becoming a certain kind of person, which is what a vocation is about. And I know that it mattered a great deal to her that in the months leading up to the coronation, the then Archbishop of Canterbury provided her with a little book of private prayers to use, which she still has. And clearly she took that entirely seriously as a matter of spiritual formation.
At times of difficulty, and certainly in the midst of a hugely demanding and busy life, she comes across as somebody who is at ease, serene, confident, and that gives me the impression that her faith is something that she really can draw upon and makes a great difference to her life.
For the Queen, the 1950s would be the most glamorous years, when she was a young and glittering international icon, buoyed by the barely critical enthusiasm of the patriotic post-war press and the broadcasters. She could have been viewed as some sort of global celebrity, but she represents something rather more enduring than that.
She doesn't care for celebrity, and I think it's very important to be able to retreat inside and be able to sort of collect one's thoughts and collect, you know, your ideas and the way things are going, and then to sort of move forward and to be able to project those ideas and those thoughts to other people. And I think she does that extremely well.
In order to project those ideas, the Queen began an annual tradition, one which allows her to be seen and heard in Britain and across the Commonwealth.
25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages. Today is another landmark, because television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day. There is something wonderful in the way these old, familiar, warm-hearted words of the traditional Christmas message never seem to grow stale.
No longer live, but recorded, she's now done 54 of these, and she's known in the trade as One Take Windsor. A pro who knows about lighting or the sound mic picking up a flight overhead.
Okay.
And she's relaxed into this. As to content, it's serious and sincere rather than surprising. This is the real Queen on what matters most to her: faith, family, the Commonwealth and the military.
This year I'm speaking to you from the Household Cavalry Barracks in Windsor, because I want to draw attention to the many servicemen and women who are stationed far from home this Christmas.
Her support for the British forces has always been fantastic, second to none. I personally, being her grandson as well as her employee, it's a huge honour. It's fantastic for me. The guys that I spend time with at work undoubtedly have huge amounts of pride, the fact that they work for such a fantastic woman. I mean, it really is that simple for us.
I certainly recognise that much has been achieved in my lifetime.
Like the rest of her life, the Christmas message is about just that, the message, not the personal image. The Queen is no doubt proud of many things, especially her family. What she doesn't seem to be is vain, even though her image is inescapable.
When she was born in 1926, films were still silent, as it were, and we now live in a world where there's 24-hour news, we live in a world of IT, of Facebook, of Twitter, all of which means that she is the most remorselessly represented figure probably ever to have lived in human history. It is an amazing thought.
After the early years of her reign, the 1960s emerged as a more questioning and less deferential decade. With it came some satirical mockery, pressure over royal funding, and a new, tougher media atmosphere.
Media is a professional intruder. It wouldn't work if it did. That's what it's doing all the time. So you can't complain about it.
The monarchy's response to the anti-establishment 1960s and the greater media curiosity was to agree to let some light in with an observational documentary called Royal Family.
Yeah. What do you have? Molly. This is what you really would like. Yes, you always go straight for ice cream. Yes.
For 75 days, the crew filmed some of the ritual and pomp of the ceremonial year, but were also allowed to capture the royals at home.
We didn't invite them into the bathroom. Or, I mean, people have judgment. They don't belong to a secret society. I mean, I can see why people shouldn't know what's going on. Much better that they should know than speculate.
He did have some very strange habits, your father. I remember when I used to come up to Royal Lodge, I asked when I arrived on, I said, where's the king? And they said, oh, he's in the garden. And I went out and there's nothing to be seen except a lot of terribly rude words and language coming out of a rhododendron bush. So I eventually found him there, hacking away, wearing a bearskin cap, which was, he was getting ready. Yeah.
When it was first shown in 1969, it became the most watched documentary in British television history, with 2/3 of the population watching.
Oh.
A triumph, except that almost at once there were second thoughts.
Oh.
Why would you do so?
I'm sorry for that.
Were parts of it a little embarrassing? Too much? Since the year of its release, the full version has never been broadcast again.
Very little happening to them.
Once you're there at the royal barbecue and you see the sausages sizzling, there's an extra layer of penetration and expectation that's created for the future. And the problem with all these things is not the film that gets made with careful supervision, but what happens next. I mean, we're all greedy in the media. We want to take it a stage further.
The film Royal Family that I don't remember a great deal about. It was done when I was only 8, 9. I mean, that was the moment when the sort of the veil was lifted to a certain extent, and the interactivity, and it's just got greater and greater and greater.
Come around this side.
The 1970s was a relatively easy decade for the Queen's family, with Prince Charles as a bachelor in his naval uniform or careering around on polo ponies, Princess Anne taking part in the 1976 Olympics. Relatively innocent times. But for Britain, these were hard times. Industrial strife, inflation, angst about national decline. So that when the Queen's Silver Jubilee arrived in 1977, there was a certain amount of uneasiness. Many socialists argued the celebrations would be a waste of public money. Some handed out Roll on the Red Republic badges, and punk rockers sang God Save the Queen, but not in a good way.
A royal salute to Her Majesty the Queen.
In the event, the Silver Jubilee was a great success.
I remember the National Celebration Day, and just the staggering size of the crowds and the noise, the cheering. It was the most infectious atmosphere, and then going out onto the balcony afterwards. And I hadn't really sort of registered particularly how important the year was. Looking back at the pictures, you can see how it just caught everybody's imagination, and it just became a bigger and bigger event.
But the Silver Jubilee turned out to be a prelude to the most melodramatic story of the Queen's reign. From 1980 onwards, a more aggressive media had a fresh target to hunt.
Lady Diana. Lady Diana. Lady Diana.
What do you think, above all, caused the change to the world that we live in now?
In 2 words, Rupert Murdoch. He bought the Sun newspaper. I was there on day 1 and became involved in royal stories quite early on. And it's quite clear that he didn't want to belong to that old school at all. He wanted to treat them like ordinary people. And most of all, with which I agreed, he wanted them treated as news stories.
As Lady Diana entered the hall for the concert, there were audible admiring gasps from those present. His lady had well and truly arrived in a manner few of those present were likely to forget in a hurry.
Well, the Queen, in many ways, and Prince Charles were very much ignored. I mean, she was the #1 attraction. You know, this woman was just a gift for the newspapers, a gift for television. And she was not just a great member of the royal family, but she was a megastar.
A staggering 750 million people around the world tuned in to watch the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer in 1981. As their marriage slowly broke down, leading to divorce in 1992, the headlines gathered pace, and both Princess Diana and Prince Charles turned to journalists to tell their side of the story.
Diana, who was a child of this media culture, who takes it for granted that she should pose for the cameras, and that she should know the first names of the cameramen, and then the reporters, and then actually confide in them, and then even as her marriage starts breaking down, sits in cars, in cabins, pouring her heart out to sympathetic journalists.
This is the absolute opposite of the Queen's attitude. She's from the reticent, buttoned-up, wartime generation. She doesn't give interviews. The only time she's spoken about her life came in 1992 for a BBC documentary, Elizabeth R, to mark the 40th year of her reign.
This was the period of the young Diana, the young Sarah Ferguson in the family. They were attracting the attention, and you tended not to get very much coverage of the Queen. And I think there was a feeling that perhaps it would not be a bad idea to remind people of the Queen's role.
And the words we heard were about her duties. They were about other people, not herself.
I'm always absolutely fascinated by the people who come and all the things that they've done. I think that's very important. The system does discover people who do unsung things, you know, and I think that's very satisfactory.
That's nice. Lovely.
And I think people need pats on the back sometimes. It's a very dingy world otherwise.
But it was the absence of words which created the biggest media storm of the Queen's reign, when in 1997, on the sudden death of Princess Diana in a Paris car crash, the Queen stayed at her castle in Scotland for another 4 days.
For the Queen, I think it was a very difficult thing for her to balance, because her first priority was to look after her grandchildren and make sure that they were properly cared for and helped through this period of grieving, when there was all this huge furore going on around. But at the same time, obviously, for the country, because Diana was revered and adored, there was a need for her to be there with the country.
I remember being in my room in Buckingham Palace and the crowd lining Birdcage Walk, waiting for her car to come back down. And there was a very quiet and quite threatening atmosphere.
Almost a mutinous
Almost a mutinous feeling. And the moment the car appeared, people started to clap. And the whole atmosphere changed. And the very fact of just responding and returning to the palace and becoming the public figure again, not the private, grieving family, sort of did it.
She took this one step further, using the media herself to talk to the nation.
What I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart. First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness.
What she was saying to the country was, look, you have to understand, this is my family, and I'm approaching this as a grandmother, but I acknowledge my duty to you as Queen. And it was interesting when she realized that that's what she had to do, she did it. And by the way, those words in that speech were her own.
It was a terrible time for the Queen, as for the rest of the royal family. And as the media has kept changing, so has the monarchy. These days, the British monarchy has a Facebook page, a royal channel on YouTube, and a Twitter page, though no tweets from the Queen herself. Doesn't seem quite right or likely. Is she in touch with what's going on in your generation much, do you think? She's on Facebook. Buckingham Palace is using some of the social networking sites.
Well, I think that's the nature of the world today, that you have to be in touch to a certain extent. But I think the wonderful thing about the Queen is that she's timeless. She's in touch with every generation just instinctively, because she is this matriarch of society now.
Reading and responding to the British public mood is a daily art. But the mood in the Queen's other realms is crucial too. Jamaica now wants to end the royal connection, while there are republican movements in countries such as Australia, Canada and New Zealand. As with the changing media at home, the Queen has had to cope with some tricky challenges.
Gliding through Sydney Heads, the sleek white liner Gothic brings Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh to the threshold of Australia. Thousands line the grey district.
In 1954, she arrived, newly crowned, in Australia, where she was an unknown quantity. This was the first visit of a reigning monarch. She hadn't faced a tour on this scale before. So how would she cope, and how would they react? It's reckoned that 3/4 of the adult population turned out to cheer.
About half of the 3 million people who cheered the royal couple slept on the pavements all night for a glimpse of this historic scene.
The Queen is Queen of Australia only because in 1770 a bold explorer, Captain Cook, was bouncing along the coast and, obeying orders, planted a flag and said, on behalf of George III, we'll have this. Now, Australia
has long been an independent and very powerful country, full of people from all around the world, many of whom have absolutely no connection to Britain. Even in modern planes, it's an 18-hour flight from London to here. Put like that, it seems bizarre that the Queen reigns here.
In 1986, the Australia Act formally severed any rights of the United Kingdom to interfere in Australian politics, and references to the Queen were removed from the country's oath of allegiance. In 1999, however, a hard-fought referendum came down narrowly in favour of monarchy. Today, members of the Australian Republican movement are still calling for radical change.
We think that we've outlived the role that a British Queen can play in Australia, that in the time of empire and then in more traditional days of monarchy, that to have a British monarch as our head of state and to have her representative, the Governor-General, as the de facto head of state was probably a system that's worked well enough in the past, but the time to move on has come.
So, in October 2011, how might the Queen be received on her 16th visit to Australia? The press is full of questions, asking whether this is the last time she'll visit. She certainly puts in the legwork, taking in Canberra, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth, and wherever she goes, the mood on the streets is sunny. She finds plenty of the old British spirit at events such as this garden party.
You've got some nice music, you've got the canapes and the little cakes. It's a little bit like Buckingham Palace. Well, only a little bit. Buckingham Palace, they offer you a very nice cup of tea. Here, we are in Australia, and you get something rather more interesting, unless you're working.
There's no doubt that the visit of a traditionalist octogenarian monarch to this sun-baked continent will have its odd moments. The Queen has kept her dignity travelling in many royal vehicles. A golf buggy, complete with equerry and royal crest, something else. In the past, the Queen has explained away her sterner expressions by saying she's just trying not to giggle. This may be one of those moments. In Australia's national capital, Canberra, the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, holds a reception for the Queen. She's said to be Republican-minded, but there's little evidence of that today.
Many heads of state and government are welcomed within these walls, but in this, the home of Australian democracy, you are a vital constitutional part, not a guest. Just as in this nation, you can only ever be welcomed as a beloved and respected friend.
And she's not the only welcome member of the royal family. The Queen's grandson has made several visits, the last in March 2011, in the wake of the floods and the cyclones which hit Queensland and Victoria.
Prince William really touched the hearts of Australians, including talking to those who had lost family members, who had lost their mother, and was able to talk to them about his own feelings about what that was like and his own experience. So it was a very emotional, intense engagement.
His visit and his wedding has boosted enthusiasm for the monarchy. People stood for hours to catch a glimpse of him, there, as he was, to represent his grandmother.
When I came back, then I got a letter, you know, congratulations, well done, it's a very good trip. And, you know, words like that, there's a lot of gravitas behind them, and you feel, you know, you've done a good thing, and it's words like that mean an awful lot.
The Queen ends her journey in the remote city of Perth, venue for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, held once every 2 years. And as head of the Commonwealth, the Queen tries to open every meeting. She considers this organisation one of the greatest achievements of her reign. By the end of her father's reign, the empire had been wound up. and now newly independent states could reject the British monarchy and choose republicanism, and yet stay inside the grouping as part of the Commonwealth. Of the 54 members today, only 16 have the Queen as head of state.
The Commonwealth is not one of the world's essential organisations, but it's a very popular club, even for countries that were never part of the British Empire and don't speak English. It is perhaps the only political passion that the Queen is allowed to express. She's called it the original World Wide Web.
But essential or not, it's popular with members big and small.
I think as the head of the Commonwealth, she has given inspiration, she has given encouragement, and indeed by her very presence on every Shugam, she came to my country, Port of Spain, when we hosted Shugam in 2009. She was in Port of Spain there, and she's gone to any part of the Commonwealth.
Thank you very much. She's been referred to as the glue that binds the Commonwealth together, and I think the stability and certainty of her role and her pursuit of Commonwealth values, of democratic values, has helped bind the Commonwealth together.
These Commonwealth visits, a lot of people, particularly in Britain, I suspect, scratch their heads and wonder what they're really for. Does it matter anymore?
Well, the Commonwealth is an amazing network. It has more than a quarter of the world's population, more than a quarter of the world's countries. It actually has an increase in economic output. And so a remarkable network is something actually more relevant as the 21st century goes on than perhaps it was at the end of the 20th century, because we live in a network world now.
From the start, she saw the value and the benefits of Commonwealth. And I think she's really tried to explore and expand and you know, make it more of a global institution. And you know, it's 2 billion people, you know, in the Commonwealth and growing. It's
more people want to join all the time, don't they?
Well, exactly. I mean, that is testament to her. That really is. Her leadership, her guidance is what's really seen the Commonwealth through.
The Queen made a promise to uphold the Commonwealth, and she takes it very seriously. But what of its future? When her heir becomes king, he will not automatically become head. It will be up to the Commonwealth leaders to decide. Do you think the Commonwealth will survive in its form after the Queen?
Absolutely, because it's almost impossible to disentangle, because there are this myriad of connections. It's not just about the heads of government. It's not just about sport. There are so many other different connections that you cannot disassemble it now.
By the end of this trip, it's absolutely obvious that the Queen's visit has been hugely popular. Chinese Australians, Japanese Australians, Indian Australians are among those waving flags when the Queen and the Duke arrive for what's billed as the world's largest barbecue. Around 100,000 people turn up in Perth. I wish she'd stop coming, said one leading Republican. She sets the cause back 20 years every time she does.
Once again, we will return to the United Kingdom with fond memories of our time here and the warm Australian welcome we have received on our 16th visit to this beautiful country.
After all those head-shaking stories about this being the last trip to Australia, and perhaps the last time a monarch will ever visit, well, by the end, neither of these things seems particularly likely. If she can make it back, she will, and even that Republican Prime Minister doesn't see a republic looming anytime